Last year, the Boston Police Department started a pilot program for testing body cameras. Despite some problems with equipment, officials say the program has resulted in few complaints. However, they want more time for the program to be evaluated. There will also be some evaluation at a series of community forums. Our guest is from one of the groups organizing that series, the co-organizer of the Boston Police Camera Action Team, Segun Idowu. Thank you very much for being with us, Segun. First of all, talk about the timeline here, because these cameras went into use about September of last year, I think?
They went at September 12th, to be exact, 2016, and we're hopeful that the pilot will be over March 12th of this year.
Now, this program, it was kind of restricted. This is not the entire department wearing it, and a lot of us were wondering, is this going to be a really representative cross-section of officers? So what do we know about this?
Well, initially, before the pilot began, we had the same concern. Originally, this program was only going to be focused on certain parts of the city. And so based on conversations with the Social Justice Task Force, between them and the commissioner, they decided to spread it out across the city with 100 officers. And so we're comfortable with that number, and we're really looking forward to whatever feedback comes back from their study of the program.
Now, what about the way this program is going to be studied? I understand there's something like $500,000 for doing this.
Yes. So one of the first victories for this program for advocates that have been pushing for body cameras was that the mayor announced back in July of 2016, putting $500,000 in his budget for the upcoming year to be for the pilot program. And on top of that, the state granted about $200,000 to the police department for the same pilot program. So there's roughly $700,000 that's being used, or supposed to be used for this pilot to cover the cost of the cameras and also the study, and also pay the officers their $500 stipend.
Well, so far I have not heard about some incident where the camera was blamed for causing a problem with law enforcement, and I have not seen any video that really seemed to be very dramatic in any way. So yeah. What do we know about what's been going on with it?
That it is a total success, and that all of the fuss over it was really for naught. So Councillor Andrea Campbell held a hearing on this January 19th of this year, and it was at this hearing that the commissioner and his staff essentially announced that all of the officers who are using these cameras have no problem with it. They appreciate having the cameras, and that these cameras have led to de-escalation of situations and actually helped them to catch folks or suspects who may have committed a crime. So it's been successful all around.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Segun Idowu of the Boston Police Camera Action Team. How is it that a camera can de-escalate something?
Well, when something is watching everything that you do, and when it's no longer a he said, she said situation, I think people on both sides of the camera decide to act a little better than they normally would. When there's going to be evidence of you raising your voice or being troublesome in any way, which would show that either the civilian responded in the best way they could to that, or the officer did, I think both the officer and the civilian tend to act on their best behavior, knowing that there is now evidence of their behavior in that situation.
And contrary to that, we did have one situation last year, a fatal shooting by police.
Yes.
They defended it. They said it was necessary. This is in the South End, and there was a conflicting narrative from the family, and I guess no camera. So maybe we don't know.
And the first question that was asked was, where was the body camera? So I think the residents of the city are all for these cameras. Officers are for these cameras. The commissioner himself, the mayor, are for these cameras. So I guess right now what BPCAT is focusing on, along with our allies, is creating this full program for the city where every officer who's on the beat is wearing this camera, because it is something that can help in those types of situations.
Talk about the forums and what this is going to be like.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we've been planning for a while with our allies, who are also co-hosting this, the NAACP, Digital Fourth, and the Racial Justice Initiative at Temple Israel Boston, is planning these community meetings where residents and police officers can come together to talk about how they've been interacting with these cameras. A lot of people haven't either seen the cameras or they have and they've just kept it to themselves. So we want to create a space where officers can share, that these cameras are working well for them or that they have these particular issues with the cameras, where residents who have interacted with them can say that I like the camera being there, but I have these concerns. It's really a way for the community to go through this process, working with officers and with police command staff on developing this policy that's going to regulate how these cameras are used. I mean, BPCAT already formed its policy and gave that up to be used, and a good number of that, about 60% of that, is used in the current pilot policy. But we want to make sure that 100% of the policy used for these cameras is something that the community was involved in shaping and something that they approved.
What about the reported problems with equipment?
I haven't heard, well, so for instance, some of the cameras have malfunctioned, either battery life or they fall off an officer. These are things that, the police department will have to take into consideration when they're contracting out which company is going to supply the police department with cameras.
Now, one thing that did occur to me is that even if you have a program where the officers don't complain, the general public doesn't complain, don't you still have to settle some other things before you make this a norm? I mean, you have questions about access to information, policy, when the camera has to be on, when it should be shut off.
So that's one of the things I hope comes up at our community forums, we have, again, put together our policy that answers these questions. We are not satisfied with what the current policy from the Boston Police Department does to answer these questions. But you're right. I mean, privacy is another big issue that we're going to have with a camera being able to come into your home, whether or not you have the right to ask that it be shut off. So yes, it will take some getting used to, but I think the same questions came up with dash cams. And eventually they became a norm and something we were used to and something that we looked for in cases where officers overstep the reach of their bounds when dealing with civilians. So I think it's the beginning of this process. I think eventually it will become something we're used to.
Do you sense that there's going to be any barrier as far as the funding of not just the cameras and any kind of training, but you've got all this information that the police need to get access to, the general public maybe. There's going to be some money involved in that somewhere.
Yeah, and I don't know why the police department is crying broke when it comes to this. So one thing is, besides the grant money, the money that the mayor and the state put aside for this pilot, the federal government consistently for the last 2 years now has put out $25 million in grant money to cover these programs to help cities and locales cover the costs of getting the equipment, training their officers, and storing the information. And every year, the police department here in Boston has failed to apply for these grants. It strikes me and those in my group as a bit odd because last month there was this kerfuffle over how the police department was going to spend $1.4 million of a $14 million grant they got from Department of Homeland Security that they wanted to spend on social media tracking. They had no problem applying for this grant money that gave them more power over civilians, that we would not have any way to regulate how they use that money or that equipment. But when it comes to a device that everyone seems to agree on works to the benefit of the community, there is this pushback and this idea that there is no money out there to cover this program. So it does cost money, but we save money in the long run because the city of Boston taxpayers are paying all this money out to cover up cases of where folks are complaining of bad behavior on the part of police officers.
Yeah, litigation money, of course. So we should mention that this series is going to begin when exactly?
So there are 4 community meetings. We can have more based on what the community response is, but the first is about a week from now, February 15th. That's being held at the Grove Hall Community Center, and thereafter it will be just about every 2 weeks. So the next one will be March 1st at Hyde Park Community Center. After that, it would be March 15th at Temple Israel, Boston, and the final one on March 20th will be at the Boston Public Library.
These are all evening, I guess?
These are all evening from 6 o'clock to 8 p.m.
And people can get more details. I know you got a Facebook page for BPCAT?
Yes, so bpcat.org/forum is where they'll find all of the information and registration info.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Segun Idowu of the Boston Police Camera Action Team.